Ёп-ёп. О, сладкое слово халява. Надо его научить. Это риф, которого, наверное, нашла.
I think.
La sì, ma facciamo una lì. Io, vammela.
They are generalist species, and they would be here anyway. So how do we account for that? Well, that would be a result of over-dispersal. If a species disperses very far and very widely and very numerously, then you're going to find it everywhere, regardless of whether it's adapted or not. And in many cases, most of those generalists are actually annual species, so they would be living during the winter. There's enough sunshine to photosynthesize, but then they would vanish during summer. What we're seeing here are the survivors. These are the plants which can resist salt and heat and lack of water, very high temperatures in the soil. They can resist up to a point herbivory. And as you can see, there are no tall plants over here. It's all very, very low lying. The plants look like cushions. And that form is probably and not so much a damaging agent because these plants are very well rooted. But nonetheless, exposing yourself to wind. Complex than all of that. In some places, well, just like behind me here, and also to the left of Nabil, it is Nabil, isn't it? Yes. Okay. Yes, it is. We get this plant over here, which we saw on the slides yesterday. That is Urginea pancration, and that is illustrating yet another adaptation to the conditions that we've got here. It lives underground. At least the business end of that plant, dormant, because it is now flowering. This is the flowering stalk coming out of the bulb. Its leaves would start turning red as the chlorophyll would be reabsorbed, and eventually it would lose its leaves. And it would remain like this in its summer costume, so to speak, up to this time of year. It has now detected the change in day length and the change in temperature, and there is this copes with another pressure that we might have in these areas, which is herbivory. Just like Urginea, this plant has a toxic irritant sap, which can be, well, probably not fatal, I should imagine, to humans. I can't imagine. Are groups of those shrubs. The conditions there are even harder than they are here. There is almost no anchorage, very little water retention, no shade when the sun is directly opposite. So the conditions are extremely tough. Our endemics live in places where people can't get to. These cliffs are the only places where Maltese builders have not yet managed to build, and therefore they are relatively unspoilt. The cliffs are protected separate from the rest of the area. Can't really be sure how to interpret that.
I don't know.
Please tell me, I'll make a chapter and I will dedicate it to you if you can tell me.
Incidentally, I should emphasize that Belinda is looking at pollen. She's looking at pollen, working with Frederic Madej and Morteza Jamali, isn't it? And somebody else?
And Dr. Valerie and
All right. And pistachia pollen, I believe, is rather fragile, is it not?
Quite fragile. I mean, there are more that, there are others which are much more fragile, but it's not one of the more...
Contribution of the charcoal from records here. Well, here there are no soil, so it's a bit difficult, but depending on the erosive pattern, then you can take samples, and it's difficult to see if it was, what was the forest coverage percentage or something like that, but at least depending on the species which you can find.
In fact, Vincent is an expert on pedoanthracology, I think a pioneer of pedoanthracology.
Yeah, well, not really, but yeah. So in Marseille it's lab, and when they are doing that, and yes, I think in such landscape it's exactly the tools, because also the record is...
Of their bags, that is probably the remains or foundations of some old megalithic building. You can't tell, but it's also associated with the gardens. Right.
Закончилось, все или? Than the school next door or something, and these were planted in the wild. They've got a relatively short lifespan, so they die out after a while, but they've got something which is not very good for our environment. They absorb lots and lots of water, and in such a dry place, that is not a good thing. Now, you will often see eucalyptus and acacia, particularly eucalyptus, fields in the countryside. You simply get a small field covered with eucalyptus. Farmers have been planting. So only one species of flower, Discoglossus pictus, but there's Rana bedriaga about 1 kilometer away from here. There's another one in here is the terminal channel of a network which catches water from the surrounding highlands and eventually discharges under that bridge and into the pool that we've just seen. Incidentally, the freshwater pool that we saw a few minutes ago is known as El Attara. Atra is a drop. The water is falling drop by drop, so hence the name El Attara. Over here, the water empties into El Attara if it eventually gets there. The point is that we're standing next to a dam which was built many decades ago, perhaps a century ago, with the express purpose of catching water, trapping water, which could be used for agriculture or for some other purpose. But what has happened is that it didn't cross anybody's mind that storm water would be carrying mud and silt and sand and soil, not just water. And eventually all of that has accumulated meters up the valley. There's a freshwater spring which is still active and very much so even during summer, discharging several liters a minute. But the water from that, this is a common problem of course with our valleys. Valleys are a habitat which is wet, a habitat which is sheltered, and a habitat which offers running water, and therefore in that case we would get the typical stream vegetation and animals that we get in other places. As animals you might think of the frog, for instance. We've been talking about frogs with some colleagues for the past few minutes. It is our only amphibian, apart from the alien amphibians which have been imported. So what has happened is that a very diverse habitat has now been changed to something quite uniform, something on which a succession has taken similar a succession function to the garrigues we had seen already, the shrublands that we've seen already. So we get the basic maritime garrigue made up of Inula cryptmoides on both sides, but then on the vertical faces, where Inula finds better adapted species, we get a change of species. And over there, as you can see, most of the species is little shells where water can accumulate, where some nutrients can accumulate in the soils. And over there we start getting species that we haven't yet seen here, like Teucrium fruticans, for instance, which is that grey bush over there in the distance. So over here, two basic types of garrigue, if you want the garrigue on the gentle slopes, but also the rupestral garrigue, very similar to the one that we get on cliffs, which is on the vertical faces. Here on this area, however, you get infiltration of steppe species coming from here and coming from there. Remember that this road was only built recently, so there has been a lot of disturbance, lots of rock piled up from all over the place, and therefore that provides a habitat for opportunists by eradicating the previous occupants of the place. So we get lots of grasses and the wild carrot. Whilst closer down, where it's less disturbed, you start getting things like down into the valley. So by and large, this place is very heavily used stone from the quarries, putting it in the valley bed. That means that water is passing on it, plants are growing on it, and after a few years that gives it an old historic appearance. So people want to buy eroded stone rather than new stone, and there's a market for it over here, which we discovered a few years ago anyway. As you can see, it's continuously in conflict. There isn't a single environment, a single habitat, a single place which is untouched, because everywhere